Hey everyone, my name is Mark Lieberstein. I'm a partner here at Kilpatrick Townsend. I'm also one of the co-chairs of our retail and consumer goods industry team, and this is one of our industry webinar series. We're going to be presenting today a program entitled Brand Licensing Strategies During and After the COVID-19 Pandemic. If you have any questions during the program, please, you can send them through the red Q&A icon found at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to respond to the questions at the time, and if not, we've left at least 10 or 15 minutes over for questions at the end, so we'll try to get to all the questions as we can. If not, worst comes to worst, we can talk to you after the program. And by the way, just so you know, there's a link to Kilpatrick Townsend's COVID-19 reopening guidebook and additional information about the retail and consumer goods industry team, which can be found in the resource link at the end of the program. So now it's time to pretty much get things started. I hope everybody is safe and well. We thought this program here at Kilpatrick would be a really great way for us to help our clients hear from industry insiders about the current state of licensing now during the pandemic and maybe what's coming down the pike towards the end of the pandemic and after the pandemic. I know that you can always consult with me about these things, but I think this is a perspective that hopefully will be different from something you'll get from your lawyer. Our two experts are both from a company called Brandgenuity, a global brand licensing agency. They represent licensors, licensees, facilitate relationships, create new ones, and strategize with brands to help them grow in many different ways. Adina Avery Grossman is a partner and founder of the agency, and most importantly for this presentation, not a lawyer. Louis Drogan is also a partner for Brandgenuity, and he's the business lawyer for the group, and he'll bring his legal perspective to the conversation. We intend to go through about 5 or 6 timely topical questions, hopefully answer yours either during and or at the end, and here we go. So let's begin. Adina, I'm going to go to you first to hopefully give a non-lawyer perspective, but have you seen a real shift in the licensor-licensee relationships? In other words, what's going on between the business partners? Is there more communication, less? Is there cooperation going on to deal with the pandemic? Are people working together in, I'll call them more optimistic, more collaborative ways in their relationships? Can you give us what you've been seeing?
Sure. Thanks, and thanks for having us. You know, I think in many ways, this pandemic has been a great equalizer, and we have seen more even more collaboration amongst our clients and their licensees since it began. I mean, obviously our job as an agent is to be the medium, sort of the intermediary between our clients, the brand owners, and the licensees. And we make sure that communication is happening even during non-pandemic times, but it's really up the game, and we are communicating more frequently. I think we're communicating with them, and they are communicating with their licensees with deeper agendas and with really robust conversation. And some of that, you know, licensing is all about relationships, and some of that is how do they bring their respective abilities and expertise to the table as a relationship, in partnership, to really address consumer needs and address retail needs and sort of get through this time. So we're seeing this collaboration on a lot of different levels. What's most striking to me, and something I've been doing this for a long, long time, is sort of the openness on the part of brand owners to really look at their licensees as a way to solve specific problems. So at this time, every brand owner is really very focused on their business and growing their core and growing their business. So we're seeing an openness to working with licensees, or even allowing licensees to enter categories that are a little bit outside the core of what the brand is doing, but allows the brand to get there. So I think there's an openness that we're seeing to getting into new categories together and really collaborating. Trying to think what else you just asked. So we're seeing regular and definitely deeper communication.
That's great. And I've actually, in my own practice, I've been seeing the same thing. I'm not aware of any lawsuits yet, and that doesn't mean they're not going to come down the road, but I think a lot of people have been showing a lot of, I'll call it creativity in how to deal with this together. And going along with that saying, we've been hearing a lot about how we're all in this together. It does seem that we are. Now, Louis, let's get to a little bit more of the. I'm sorry, Dina. I cut you.
I just want to say there's lots to be learned. I think both the licensees and the licensors are trying to understand where the consumer's head is at, right, and where the consumer is going to be going. So sharing insights, sharing lessons learned, sharing experiences at retail, talking about the research that they're doing with consumers and how consumer behaviors are changed right now, but also what's coming. And I think that that's the kind of conversation, not just what do we do in this moment, but how are things going to look differently in the 1, 2, 3 years to come as we face down a recession? What can we do together as licensors and licensees to really meet the consumer where the consumer is? And our very best clients are the ones who are thinking not just today, but forward with their licensees about where things are headed.
Now, Louis, let's get a little legal on this subject about the relationship, and in particular about the exclusivity. What's going on with exclusivity within the relationship? Are licensors giving out the ability for their licensees to get second source for things that they may not be able to get from their current manufacturers or through their current supply chain? Have you found that license agreements that were written before the pandemic actually anticipated this crazy time we're living in? And what do you see in that realm with the relationship?
Sure. I'm not sure if anybody saw this pandemic coming other than a very few.
Right.
But even in discussing, an extraordinary issue as we have today, we would be very careful in bringing on new licensees to fill in any short-term gaps when we start talking about secondary sources. As you know, Mark, and most of the people listening, the most valuable asset of a trademark license agreement is usually the licensor's trademark, and we have to be very careful with that asset. So our corporate clients really do expect a very high level of due diligence, whether it's financial, product quality, factory audits, et cetera, before they enter into a new partnership. So we have not really seen a scenario where a licensor has quickly licensed a new company to fill a gap. Though it's certainly not out of the question. The way I think is a more reasonable approach would be is to work with the licensee in most cases and have the right to source a new supplier. And most agreements allow for that new supplier through third-party manufacturing agreements, which can be used by the licensee with the approval of the licensor. If need be, those third-party manufacturing agreements can quickly be amended to being sub-license agreements if that secondary supplier needed to be able to distribute and sell the product. But that's probably a better and safer way to do it. The licensee who is in the market is usually in a better position to find and administer a secondary source to fill a shortage than a licensor bringing on a new partner during a crisis such as this.
Right. So now you're touching on some of the. Whoa! I hear a lot of feedback. You're touching on some of the issues that lead to my next question. So obviously, there's been a lot of difficulty in compliance with licensee complying with their obligations, and even on the flip side of that, licensors complying with their obligations in light of the pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about force majeure. I know that everybody's heard that word. I know there have been lots of webinars on it, but from the licensing relationship perspective, what have you seen going on with force majeure?
Sure. This is a really interesting question, Mark. I think in, 20 years before this, I've rarely ever seen force majeure mentioned anywhere. Right. And certainly we have them in our license agreements, but I probably have 50, as everybody on this webinar has 50 articles from law firms and business magazines filling their inboxes with opinions of the effect of force majeure and clauses from all around the world. My short answer is no. It actually has been a unique situation, even unlike Katrina or Sandy, or even going back to 9/11. It's a global phenomenon, and both the licensees and the licensors, have both felt the consequences of the business shutdown. Brand Genuity, we've negotiated in the last 8 to 10 weeks many agreements, or renegotiated, I should say, Everything from small licensees, apparel agreements to multi-million-dollar corporate agreements. None of them have been terminated under force majeure, and neither the licensees nor the licensors were really trying to ever exit those agreements. In most cases, we've made reasonable accommodations, and I must say in all cases, the parties have not used this moment to really leverage and unfairly negotiate a more favorable deal by threatening force majeure. It's been a pleasure, actually, to see the partners acting as true partners in finding solutions to an unprecedented problem with still an uncertain future. So can I see force majeure in certain agreements being enacted? I can. I think both sides are a little bit rolling the dice somewhat, as I do think the force majeure clauses in each agreement and in general case law will be a hotly litigated topic, over the next few years. And I think relying on a force majeure clause right now is akin to opening up Pandora's box. I would rather that the licensees and the licensors find a way around force majeure to come to an agreement that's rational for both sides.
Right. I mean, I agree with you. I have not really seen it really put into play, so to speak, and I have seen a lot of the accommodations being made. But that's interesting. I think you might be right. We might have a different story towards the end of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Well, at least right now, I think that's right. Great, thank you. So, but now it's a very good segue. Some of what you said leads into my next question. And Adina, I'm not ignoring you, I promise, but these are just some legal things I want to get out of the way, so to speak. But Louis, you mentioned we talked about it. We mentioned already some of the accommodations. I know I've been reading about things. I know myself, I've been implementing certain things, but I mean, I've seen lower royalty rates being put in. I've seen parties extend minimum guarantees out either an extra year. I've seen payment obligations either being eliminated or reduced completely. I've seen minimum sales requirements put out to years, maybe cross-collateralization between the years, modifying the scope of the licensed products. I've seen expansion of channel options. In other words, if the United States or a territory within the United States is shut down, maybe you're giving the licensee a chance to go outside. Sometimes you're also letting them do different channels where they may or may not have experience, but that's an option I've seen too. And then even complete shifts. So in other words, we've seen lots of brands go into new kinds of PPE related products that they weren't in before, and they've had to get either existing licensees or new licensees. I've seen that too. What are you seeing as the trend? What's the rationale behind some of these things? What's your view from the legal side? Dina, you can chime in a little bit there too.
It sounds like you've seen a lot, Mark. You hit a bunch of them. That's
some of it
for sure.
I've read. Some of it I've read. Not all of it I've done, but some of it I've done.
I would say we've used a lot of the solutions that you've referenced, and and maybe even a few others to find equitable solutions brought on by the crisis. I think from a 100,000-foot view, I think the most important principle to finding the right solution is just not have a cookie cutter approach. Not have a corporate policy of COVID relief. The licensees really need to be treated fairly, but that does not always mean that every licensee is equal. You really need to look at, are we talking about hard goods? Are we talking about soft goods? Are we talking about, medical devices versus T-shirts? And those things have to be taken into account. At Brangenuity, we have a very good handle of our licensees' day-to-day business and our clients' needs. So we can look at each agreement, more of a standalone partnership and try to find a more equitable solution for both sides that will put both sides really in the best position, once both the businesses resume a little more normally and at a normal pace than we're at. Certainly there aren't any winners, but we can kind of at least help that it's not a loss for everyone. Specifically to answer your question, more from a 10,000-foot view, I would say, the most central issue of the contracts that I think all of us have seen have really been surrounding cash flow. and certainly short-term cash flow. And what we have to remember is cash flow is a two-way street. It's the cash flow of not only the licensee, but we also have to remember that it's also, part of a cash flow of your licensor. With regards to royalty rates, we've used royalty rates both lowered, and in some cases we've raised royalty rates in future years to make up for any shortfalls. Right. But the majority of the negotiations seem most concerned, even so, really about those short-term guarantees. So it's really a difficult situation. Retailers are taking longer, and in some cases taking longer to pay. In some cases they're not, and in some cases they're not paying at all. So we've run the spectrum in our agreements from forgiveness of minimum guarantees, which you spoke about in certain instances, to negotiating larger payments in future years, to simply just recasting the payment schedules to better help the licensees with short-term cash flows. You have to look at many factors in the relationship and experience that you really have with those licensees, their geographical location, the location of their factories, the type of products that they are producing, the investment needed to create those products, and truthfully, the importance of that licensee to the program in its whole. So, the maturity of the licensee, I could go on, but you really have to take all of those factors into really looking at the best way to come up with a strong negotiation and a strong compromise between the companies. I would say in a couple of the instances I have not done. I've not expanded channels or expanded geographies. I think in discussing expanding channels, unless the licensee really has the ability to sell on those expanded channels, maybe, but I'm not convinced in most cases that would be realistic, that the licensee has the ability to sell. There's different buyers, there's different margins, and those other channels of distribution may not be where a licensor wants to sell those products. There also may be an alternative, better licensee in those types of channels. And geography is similar to that, except I think even more difficult. During these times, it's hard to find and expand an expansion in a simple scenario, especially in hard goods types of licenses. You're going to have to face new packaging guidelines, different regulatory rules, trademark issues in different territories. And again, licensees may strategically not want, or legally not want, to enter those territories. So to have this quickly done during this time with the supply chains and manpower issues, it would seem rather difficult and probably not as prudent to expand geographies. But again, depending on a case-by-case basis, there may be times to do that. But as a general rule, I'm not sure if that's one that I would suggest.
Now, Adina, from your business hat on, putting it on for a second, putting aside all the legal stuff, I guess, do you see certain industries maybe that are doing this better as far as the shift goes, or the accommodations? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think 3 months ago, we didn't really know what anything was going to look like. And it's hard to talk about anybody winning during this period, but there actually are categories that are winning. And, that includes the obvious, like household cleaners and laundry and garbage bags, categories that we are now, all of us in quarantine, using day in and day out. Clearly, we all got very ready with first aid products and wellness products. I don't know if you're on Facebook or Instagram, but baking is, off the charts. You can't find flour, you can't find yeast. So all the things that go along with baking and sort of spending those time, that kind of time with your family, crafting, home decor. People are around their homes more, and they're noticing, light bulbs that aren't, light fixtures that aren't quite up to date, or furniture that needs to be changed out, or that mattress that isn't helping my already bad night's sleep. So those categories are okay. Toys and games, right? We're spending more time with our kids and we're spending more time at home. I know personally in the last month, I don't even want to tell Louis how much money I spent to get my home office really working, right? Mice and keyboards and accessories and AirPods or EarPods or whatever they're called. We're working from home. So those home those sort of computer peripherals and electronics categories. I had an interesting conversation with an HBA retailer and licensee last week. And while cosmetics might be challenged, and they are, things that are related to wellness or sort of home spa, people doing their own hair color and doing their own manicures and pedicures, those seem to be okay. I don't have to tell you about hand sanitizer. Athleisure is in pretty good shape. Off the charts, I know for us as well, is gaming. So interactive gaming and mobile games, and people are just spending a lot more time on those platforms. You asked us in the preamble to this call, Mark, about masks. And I said that initially our position on that as an agency was, lean out. Let the masks, especially the ones that are the most functional, be available for the people on the front lines who need them the most. But over the course of the last 3 months, thank goodness that has happened, hopefully. And now masks are taking on a different role, right? And they're starting to creep into fashion and functionality. And we have licensees, the better licensees are the ones who, first of all, got there sort of quickly with the idea, but more importantly, have a way to sell it, right? They have their own direct-to-consumer, e-commerce channels. So when those masks are being done sort of in the right way and a little bit of a philanthropic or charitable contribution on top of that is another strategy that some of the big studios have used in Warner and Disney to try and make that mask thing make sense. I think that's really that's happening. On the retail side, there are some clear winners as well. Again, it's hard to think of anybody winning, but Amazon is winning and Walmart is winning and Staples is selling and Home Depot is selling and your grocery stores are being, visited and drugstores are okay. We are looking very seriously as we look at a recession at what role will dollar channels play, will off-price channels play like TJ Maxx and Marshalls. Wayfair is doing great. Of course, as a contrast, department stores, specialty stores, anyone who really wasn't able to sort of use the e-commerce channel are probably, struggling more. And we're trying to think about what happens to the brands that we have that are, most appropriate for those channels going forward. So these were not new trends, but they're sort of been, magnified by the current situation. Does that answer?
That was great. You gave me a really good, or gave us, I should say, a really good picture of what's going on now. But now what I want you to do is shift a little bit. Put on your genie hat, your crystal ball, look into your crystal ball. What do you see about either future markets or future trends or future opportunities? I mean, obviously we're all playing with a finite world we're living in now because of the pandemic. We're all at home. Right. So what's coming up? What do you think's coming up? What's down the road?
So, a couple things. First of all, at Branch Annuity, I have to say somewhat surprisingly, we've been really, really, really busy. I think some of that is that all of us and our colleagues and our clients and our licensees are available, right? But it's also that in uncertain times, brands take on sort of an emotional and powerful role. And we expect, so if you ask us to put in, our crystal ball is that this is not going to stop. This is actually going to continue. That as retail recovers or, takes whatever form it's going to take, we believe brands are going to be more important. Now, it has to be a brand that offers value, that that people will feel it's worthy to pay for the brand and not just buy private label. But in uncertain times, brands matter and they're highly trusted. And so we're getting lots of calls from manufacturers looking to take on brands. They want our help finding brands, and from brand owners who might, before this not really have entertained the idea of expanding through licensing, but are now seeing that it's an opportunity for them. It's a marketing opportunity, it's a revenue opportunity, and it's an opportunity to sort of meet consumers where they are. So that's sort of one thought I have. As I said before, I think we have to look at those value channels and think about how we take brands into value channels. There's some staggering number, like 40% of unemployed currently unemployed make less than $40,000. So we need to think about, where are people going to be shopping and what are they going to be looking for, and how do we meet them with products that are worthy of them and really reward them. How do we take advantage of sort of not take advantage of, but really how do we project where the consumer is going to be? And the third piece of that is, where is the consumer going to be, right? We really need to look at, from a marketing standpoint, are consumers thinking exactly how they were thinking 6 months ago? Research that was done 6 months ago about the advisability or the appeal of a product might look very different if you did that research today. I sat on a call last week where a client actually just did research during COVID, which consumer research during COVID is not easy. You can't do it in person. So there are lots of methodologies that enable you to do consumer research when you can't sit in the same room with the consumer. But we're going to need to check and recheck those assumptions of decisions that are being made in this period. I think a lot of the behavior will continue, and it might be modified slightly, but I don't think this is going away so fast, and that consumer insights or how the consumer feels is going to go away so quickly. So it's really staying in touch with the consumer and doing that research and doing that thinking. And I think our best clients and our best licensees are really thinking about that, thinking about what the future holds and how they can work together to meet those needs in a changing world.
I'm going to throw the next one out to both of you. I'm going to throw out a word, really, the word trust. So the world is obviously changing. Licensors and licensees are now working more closely together, as we've discussed, than ever before, to make things work, figure out a way to make it go. I know I've been counseling clients on sustainability and the environment, and there's a new thing out now called B Corp. Not that new, but very few people do it, but more and more brands are doing it. Where do you see this concept of trust, whether it be between licensor and licensee, or the both of them and the consumer? How do you see that shifting in the license relationship now, with safety concerns and health concerns? Where do you see the role of that going forward?
Louis, you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Sure. I mean,
it's a legal one and a business one. It's not really.
I think it's, Adina, I'm sure I'll have more to add. I think that in the world that we're going to be living in, I think that the trusted brands are going to win. I think that there's going to be less brands, and those that are the trusted brands, and certainly some private label as well for profitability are we're going to see increase. I do think pre-COVID and post-COVID, there has been a shift in the last few years of not only the brands, but the companies behind those brands and what they stand for. So I don't think 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, people really looked at a brand and then went the next step to look at the company and saw what their global warming or their carbon footprint, or whether they were looking towards sustainability or any of those things. And I think that especially millennials, but right. People in general really want to make sure that the company behind the brand is really standing for something. So I think that's a big difference as well. Adina, I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Yeah, and I sort of see it as two questions. So the first thing I'm going to say is this sustainability thing is here to stay. Right. We also have an office in London, and we service many of our clients globally, and we do some licensing just in Europe and outside of the U.S. And there's no question that in Europe it is a constantly on the minds of both manufacturers and brand owners, how they can be more green, be more sustainable, and really do a better job in all of that. And I think we're slightly behind here, but catching up quickly. And so it is a focus of many of our clients and increasingly of our licensees. So that I think is here to stay. I think COVID, I think we took a little bit of a pivot over to safety versus green, right? Like that people who might previously just have purchased a green cleaner are going to be taking a closer look at whether that green cleaner also, kills germs in this particular environment. But I think that, eventually we're going to get past this, and we're still going to see millennials and Gen Z and everyone around us caring about, green issues, environmental issues, and that the companies that they are buying from have good values and values that they associate with. So that's sort of answer number one. I think that's here to stay. Answer number two is, because trust is so important. I know, we work for some incredible brands that have long, more than 100-year histories of trust with the consumer. I expect that we already treat them like they're our own brands as an agency. I expect they, as brand owners, will be increasingly, continuously vigilant about protecting their brands and making sure that when they partner with licensees, those licensees care and love and develop those brands as well as they would if they were doing it themselves. So, process for product development and packaging development and messaging and marketing, all of that stuff really has to be good, and it has to be right, and it has to ladder up to support the brand and fulfill its equities. And I think our clients will continue to make sure that we do that and that they do that with their core products, because that is at the basis of the trust, right? Is that everything that gets delivered under the brand really delivers the promise. It's not just a trust, it's a promise that you can rely on the quality and the safety and the performance and everything else that's associated with it. So I think that they're going to protect their brands. They might be willing to expand them in different ways, but they're going to continue to protect them wherever we go. So that's the discipline. That's the God is in the details part of licensing. Right. And you give your brand to somebody else to develop product, you're giving your most precious asset, as Louis said. Your most valued thing is your name. Our job is to mind the details along with the licensees and make sure that trust is never broken.
That was thank you. So this pretty much wraps up our line of questions that we wanted to draw out and discuss. We've got about 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. If anybody has any questions and answers, most of you know me. If you've ever done a meeting with me, I'm pretty good with my meetings and keeping them on time. Louis and Adina, I think I kept my promise to you. We did well on time to leave questions and answers open. It was very nice to go from sort of the bad to what I think is a more optimistic and a nice look forward. I was very nice where we ended up, and I think your crystal ball, I hope comes true, Adina, and the rise of brands and accommodating for the new economy that we're going to be in will hopefully come to fruition. If there are any questions, you can send them through that. If I didn't say it before, I'm sorry, but I thought I was given instructions. There's a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. I know I had to roll up my screen to actually see that Q&A icon. If you haven't seen it yet, you can send a question through there. We'll give it a couple of seconds. Louis, Adina, any other thoughts that you wanted to impart to the audience while we've got them for a few more minutes?
Adina?
So I've completely lost my picture. I went into the Q&A.
Oh, no.
So I cannot see you guys talking to me.
We can hear you.
I'm assuming you can still see. I'm assuming you can still see me. I'm taking a quick look. Look, I think we didn't talk about. I talked about the categories that are winning. I didn't talk about some of the categories that are struggling. Those include things that we have not been able to do. So, for example, our automotive, in terms of like functional things for your car that you buy for your car, experiential. Before COVID, we were highly focused on how do we create licensed services and experiences, whether that's travel or escape the room, entertainment types of things, or we've done a Rocky Run, which is a half marathon where you get to relive the Rocky movie, and run through the streets of Philadelphia. All of those things that involve lots and lots of people being together have clearly struggled, as are clearly struggling because we can't get together, as is something like fashion. So when you talk about the crystal ball, as the restrictions begin to release and as we find a way to come back together again, our expectation is that shopping is a social activity, not just a functional activity, and sort of integral to the fabric of American life. So things that have struggled in the past few months, we're really hopeful will come back, as well as some of the things that have will sort of stabilize out, but will still be needed. So I think we are trying to be optimistic. Louis, would you say so?
Yeah, I think what's been interesting more on a work side and I think I kind of alluded a little bit to it, but people have been on both sides, licensor and licensee, in these really, really tough times, coming together and really acting really honorable with each other. I have not seen too many issues of people really trying to, use this as a negotiation point. I think because it's such a global, since it's a pandemic, both sides really are truly feeling for each other, not only from a business, but personally. And I think it's really led to some really different types of negotiations than I've had in the past, which I think has been really, really optimistic, in look and how people have acted. I think from a business point of view, we've seen, I think Adina's right. There's certain categories that have blown up, and certain things that we've seen that have been great. Adoption of animals. We represent a shelter. Adoption and fostering of animals at this point. People taking in animals at a booming rate, and people really spending more time with their families. Part by necessity, but I think it's something that we're going to see more into the future, and it may actually, kind of change people's behaviors even after COVID. So it's a very interesting time, and
it's been very nice. I just helped a rather large, well-known foundation open up a food bank in 3 weeks. I signed 3 documents and negotiated them in 3 weeks, from concept to implementation. And they're now feeding like 5,000 people over somewhere in the middle of Long Island. I'm not going to get into too many details, but it's just been, it was so easy to negotiate. It was a pleasure almost, which is unlike the past. But
people really are working together.
Anyway, let me just scroll down and make sure there's no Q&A. We do have one question that just popped in. Actually, there's a few. Look at that. Okay, so I'm going to take the first one. I'm going to read this out loud. Adina, I don't see you, and Louis, I don't see you anymore, but I'll read it anyway. What has been the strategies of the luxury brand product manufacturers and service providers during this time?
It's interesting. Actually, Louis, do you want to talk a little bit about BMW, or I guess we can't talk specifically about brands, but I think that, we have 50 BMW stores in China. China is opening, right? The malls are starting to open. Things are starting to move. So I think that in some cases, it may be a question of territory, right? That things will come back first in certain regions and maybe later in other regions. Or there may be, licensees that are able to sell online, or may shift or pivot some of their focus and their marketing to online and digital sales versus things that would be typically sold in stores. So again, it requires some thinking and creativity and really looking together at what the options are. Louis, anything else? You deal with them every day.
No, I think. I think that the luxury companies are also finding new types of products to not only compete in this market, but to really help the people. So, we've seen everything from companies making disinfectant bottles to to looking at towards different products that people may need more than some of the luxury products that they are making today. But generally, I think it's been a difficult time for them. Obviously, more selling on e-commerce, and hopefully, what we're seeing a little bit is that people do have a pent up. There is a pent up demand, and once the world starts to open, that those luxury products will certainly rebound in most cases as well.
That's what I'm seeing as well. By the way, that question was from, I'm going to screw this name up, but I'm going to try to get it right. Rudy Ramugia from Kotari and Associates. The next question is from Jacob Pargament from Garson Siegel, and I can't read the rest of it, but Garson Siegel. Let me just open that up. What's the most innovative pivot that you have seen from a brand thus far during the COVID pandemic?
So, you know what, I would have to say, I don't think I was very clear or articulate when I answered the first question. So let me come back and say that I think that if I were more clear about it, it might answer this question as well. You know, I think what's been innovative is brand owners who are willing to step back, look at their businesses and their product lines and say, this is what I am going to focus on in the next couple of years. I'm going to focus on this part of my portfolio, these product lines. And if something is simply not either big enough or aligned enough with what I do, I am going to look to a licensee to help me get that product to market. And it may actually even be a product that the brand owner is in. So imagine a brand owner saying, I make it today, I sell it today, I market it today, I distribute it today. But as I stay focused on, what is most important and what's going to really drive my business, there are going to be these sort of more on the periphery type opportunities that I am willing to give to a licensee. And that to me is the innovative thinking of saying, I cannot do everything right now. I want to do what I do best and really focus on that. And I want to look to my partner to help me take care of some of that other stuff. So to me, that's been the most surprising and eye-opening thing, is that there is a willingness and an openness to consider getting to market with something you already make, but doing it through your licensee partner because they can get there well and fast and and really focus on it. That a smaller business could be a major focus for a licensee, but would not be a focus for the licensor. And then I also just think there's an openness to think about brands that maybe they haven't developed in a while or even developed at all, right? And so there are many companies that have trademarks that they I wouldn't say they're sitting on, they're just not maximizing or potentializing. And looking at this as an opportunity to say, what else can I do with the trademarks that I own? Louis? And anything you can think of?
Innovation? Yeah, innovative pivot. I would say some of the things that I've seen that maybe don't look so innovative now, but many of the Halloween costume companies quickly started making masks for COVID and really changing over their assembly to do things like that. I've also seen from a licensee point, and I don't know if I would consider this a pivot, but maybe it is, in that they're starting to look for different types of licensors and different types of brands that may follow through COVID. So, for example, we represent an e-games company right now, and we're seeing a lot of demand for things, cost of the demand of e-games, and really the proliferation of e-games, especially during this time. People are really looking towards those brands that maybe they did not look at towards, and they just looked at traditional sports before so, but we're seeing a lot of demand for those. So I think that the innovation is also coming from the way the licensees are perceiving the world and what types of brands will win going forward.
And we have one more question that we will quote pivot to, but I'll just add on one little thing. But in one area of the brand world that I work a lot in, food and beverage, I've seen a lot of interesting pivots, especially in the fine dining space. I mean, fine dining has basically been destroyed. And you've seen a lot of fine dining institutions with big chefs who are trying to figure out a way to do business. And sometimes they are doing it with licensees, whether it be through a curbside third party working out the curbside stuff, or even in the form of direct delivery, where they're developing that network for themselves through a third party operating it. Another big thing that I've just been reading more about is they're making, with licensees, helping them, ways to sell the products almost in consumer product form. So you'd sell essentially a recipe kit that you can buy on the shelf. I mean, a fine dining institution was never doing that before. They weren't giving it. So that's a whole new realm that I think a lot of big brand fine dining brands are finding themselves in and switching to. But getting to the concept of, and I keep losing the screen, I'm sorry. But the question was, and it relates to that esports and e-games, it's sort of has no live sports hurt any of your clients? We didn't touch on that at all, but I thought that was an interesting question.
Yeah. Well, I think as Louis mentioned,
certainly couldn't help, right? Doesn't help.
Well, listen, we just signed. I think it's one of the top. Yeah, it's one of the top esport teams. There's a lot of activity around licensing in that whole area. So for us, that's going to be a key, area of focus going forward. I heard recently that there's such a people are so starved for sports content that there more and more there is, people watching esports on air. Our partner, Andy, told me this morning he was flipping through the channels, Louis, yesterday, and saw a cornhole competition. Like the people are actually watching people play cornhole. And so, it does get to this idea of sort of where are the next brands going to come from. He also said that people were following Korean baseball because I guess baseball's back up in Korea. And if you can't watch your own team, you're happy to watch baseball. So I think we have to be thinking about, where are the brands going to emerge from? Are there going to be new brands that emerge from that space? And, how to capitalize on it. Lou, I don't know.
It certainly is. It certainly isn't good live sports for concessionaires and obviously for all the people that are in the live entertainment commerce. It has not been as hurtful for the interactive world, whether it's e-games or certainly the sales of some of our licensed products that relate to different sports, whether it be motorsports or NFL, et cetera. So yeah, yes, it's not good. People are obviously really demanding and really craving for those live sports. But there has been a very interesting, Phil, as Adina talked about, the 1 a.m. Korean baseball that you can watch here on the East Coast. But certainly the amount of people that are participating in video games, from the superstars playing in tournaments to this new kind of propulsion of e-games that we've seen, to other brands that are more online, like, even what you're seeing in the world of Peloton and those types of things, where people are really starting to admire those brands and bring those brands into the forefront, and those things are doing even better than ever. But I do think that live sports will be back. I think they will always have a place in all of our lives, and it'll just be a little bit longer until we all can go to those stadiums and sit with 99,000 other people.
And just, if I didn't mention that question came in from Jim Acton from Acton Strategies. I wanted to get to a question actually asked by my own partner, Christine James. Let me just read it because it says, can you speak to companies who have decided affirmatively to renege on their manufacturing agreements with overseas manufacturers? There was a recent news piece where a representative from Bangladesh's apparel industry said they have $2 billion worth, holy cow, of cloth purchased for the manufacture of garments for others. And there are many other companies who have said they won't accept delivery for, or they won't pay for. Is there a win-win in this situation? Do you see one?
I have not, thankfully, faced that issue. But I could imagine that there are people that are reneging on agreements because simply there's no place to sell those garments. So it's going to go straight down the food chain. I
And
don't.
the seasonality thing too, I would imagine, is a tough thing to.
Seasonality is going to be very, very difficult. I mean, that companies, there are certain companies that you can think of, certainly companies that sell most of their goods in summer, from sunglass companies to companies that make sunscreen, et cetera. It's a really, really tough time. So I can see definitely some reneging on those. But again, most companies hopefully have very strong relationships with their contract manufacturers and can go out and find an agreement rather than just reneging. I have not had to deal with that, so I don't have a really great answer for you. But hopefully the relationships will help in that situation. But yeah, it's a very, very difficult situation right now. And as much as we've talked about partnership and people really working together, there are definitely instances, sadly, where companies are going to wind up not surviving this pandemic.
I actually wonder out loud, without knowing if it's appropriate or not, but I wonder if that amount of inventory could be repurposed for the target markets, the lower end discount value markets, where those goods might be able to be channeled and stuff like that. I don't know. If there's some good that could come out of that much in inventory, maybe even giving it as charity to people in need and stuff like that. I wonder if some brand could get something out of that, some value out of that.
Maybe it's
but yeah, it's a tough situation. So we are just about out of time. Let me just check to make sure did I cover everything? All right, we did a good job there. Okay, so thank you all very much for attending today's webinar. If there were some things that we did not get to, or if you have additional questions after we get off the webinar, please feel free to email me, Adina, or Louis directly. We'll be happy to talk to you directly. If there are any other topics or things you'd like us, the firm or us, or anyone else to talk about, please let us know what your ideas are for topics. We'll be happy to consider them and present them in this format. Hope everybody stays safe and healthy. Be well, everyone. Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Adina, very much. Thank you for engineering. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.